Principles and Problems. I'm glad you're here. I hope you enjoy it. We have 7 handouts tonight, a lot of reading. But I want to tell you, I have read every word of them this week, so I know that it can be done. But they concern very much of what we hear. The first one is, why is the Constitution so hard to understand? People run through it in 30 minutes and say, well, I understand that, and they don't know the first thing about it. And the reasons here, why is our freedom so easily lost? Constitutional Principles and Communism is the name of the course I used to call it, but this is the right and control of property, because the right to own and control property is one of the 3 legs on the stool, and it's basic to the subject tonight, which is taxation. Now, I've listed here the 4 subjects I will try to cover as time permits: the income tax, the property tax, bonds, and charity and poverty. Now, what does charity and poverty have to do with taxation? It is the excuse for millions and billions of dollars which they lay on us. And I don't think you can really cover taxation unless you cover the charitable things. There's no such thing as government charity. It's force, and force is not charity. But so I'm going to include that in it. I have an article, Socialism in the Early Church. You remember in Acts it said they had all things in common, and twice in the Book of Mormon they had all things in common. And people interpret to mean that they sold all their property and gave it in, and they all shared it together. They ate in a common dining hall, they used a common laundry. And the United Order, when it started out, started on the false principle of socialism, and it failed utterly. The United Order, they started out with common laundries. You want your laundry washed with somebody else? I don't think you do. But this article explains why they did not have a socialist economy in any of those scripture things. The author of this didn't know about those among the Nephites, so we know more than he does, but he covers it very well. Lesson 8, Taxation and the Income Tax. Here's a study course lesson on the right and control of property. I mentioned that. Here's a little bit of fun. Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address is one of the most famous addresses ever made. Now, someone's done a parody on it, and I hope that it's not sacrilegious to him, but I think you'll enjoy that. And this, in my other course, when I had 24 lessons, I had one entire lesson on charity and poverty and taxation. So that'll give you some of that. A Christian principle of charity. Let's proceed with our lesson. We first take up income tax. Money is said someplace is the root of all evil. I have a book called Income Tax, the Root of All Evil. One of the great conspirators who has a great power over the moneyed affairs of our country, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Kennedys, and those Bushes and those people, said, "Give me control of the money and I don't care who runs the government." And that's the way it has been. The money people have been running our government, and they are the reason that we have an income tax. This money involves tax-free foundations in the income tax. It's an insidious thing, and I may have time to explain that. The Federal Reserve Bank is not a federal bank. It's a private-owned business. And again, the people who control it persuaded Congress to give them the right to print our money. Instead of Congress coining money, they delegated to a private banking company the printing of our money. And in order to get money from them, we have to buy it from them. And to buy it, we give them our debts. The government takes its debts, its huge debts, and puts them on there as a note, and then they buy the money back and pay interest on the note. It is an absolute disaster, and not one person in 100,000 understands it. Federal Reserve Bank, they're the ones that can control interest rates, raise them or lower them wherever they want to. They are the money controllers of our country. Inflation is a deliberately imposed thing based on debt financing. The Constitution provided that the government could go in debt in case of a war or some great emergency, but they wanted them to operate on a cash-on-hand basis. They did not want them to accumulate huge amounts of money in the government. They wanted them to tax and raise what money they needed as they went. And that principle, if applied in the city as well as the federal government, would save us lots of money. Well, I'll save that till I get to bond. Gold and silver, the only constitutional form of money. I've explained to you before, the notes you carry for money, they're worth 2 3/4 cents a paper they're printed on. The income tax is not primarily a tax, it's a scheme and a program for controlling the money, the lives, the business, and the affairs of the people of this nation. It destroys constitutional government. The power of the government is misused to raise these funds. It destroys individual liberty and property rights. It results in slavery. People don't realize, but they're in slavery to pay the income tax. Morality, it is a source of corruption. The corruption in the IRS and everything related to it is amazing. Now, we have a nation of largely good, honest people, but when you are faced with a very complicated income tax and you spend days and weeks trying to figure it out and go over the records, and you're missing something here and there, the temptation to cheat a little might be there. It just might be there. And CPAs, the way they continue to change the income tax laws, they can hardly keep up with it. They just struggle and struggle. My CPA said to me, notice there's a new tax law, you better be looking out for this and that, so forth. It's the root of all evil. Well, this leads me back to what I started. We're supposed to start with a recurrence to fundamental principles. And we spent many lessons, 7 lessons, we've emphasized fundamental principles over again. We explained them, so forth. So I'm going to only refer to 2 of them, and the rest of them as we go. We talked about how government is organized to protect the property. That's why we do it. Remember, on our little island, we hired the sheriff to protect our property. The protector becomes the plunderer. Almost every government ever formed grows and grows and gains power and becomes the plunderer. Income tax is one of the greatest means of plundering ever invented. All right, fundamental principles have been recurred to. Here again, the fundamental principle is the Constitution was given by the Lord. It was the Lord's plan for preserving the freedom of the people. The Constitution prohibited an income tax. The Constitution provided that no tax could be laid on any individual. The Constitution provided that all taxation must be equal. Article 1, Section 8 gives Congress the power to lay and collect taxes in order to fulfill the purposes listed. Now, if we uphold our oath to the Constitution, why, we'd be saving a lot of trouble. The Communist Manifesto, you remember that was the Marx Engels plan for taking over America. Plank 2, a compulsory graduated income tax. Have we adopted their plan? And by the way, On that Communist Manifesto, we've been through it before, but you remember that of the 10 things, we have adopted 8 of them and leaning toward the others. Do you think the Gadiantons are in control of our government? It's not primarily created as a tax. Tax is the excuse. It's an instrument of destruction to destroy our republic, our freedom, and destroy human values. It is a, well, I guess I've said as much as I should about how mean and wicked, corrupt, and rotten it is. The real purpose of the tax, as I said, it was not money. The amount of income tax that they collect is a fraction of all the taxes they collect in many other ways. That is the excuse. Of course, they want all the money they can get, but it's a real purpose is absolute control of every purpose individual. Confiscation. You may remember I told you that you don't own any property. The income tax amendment gives the federal government power to tax up to 100%. Anything less than that is just what they give you permission to keep. It provides one of the greatest abuses of our Constitution, the right not to testify against yourself, and that you are guilty only if proven guilty. You do not have to admit your guilt. They have to prove it by 2 or more witnesses in overt court. But under income tax law, you are guilty unless you can prove that you are innocent. Any charge they make against you, anything of omission or fraud or anything, here's our charge. If you can't prove it, you're guilty. Complete violation of everything we have. It's a business burden. Many of you have been in business. I have. I know that the income tax was a big problem. Tax on so many ways that fit into it. Payroll, accounting, legal, operation, it affects everything you do. And they have an army of snoopers to see if you do. The IRS has more than 100,000 employees. And they have many different agencies that are not in contact with each other. They have computer banks that record things, but the computer banks are not all linked. So you can be in one computer bank, you can be accused of something in another computer bank, and you have a hard time finding your innocence in this one to match that. Evasion, collusion, intimidation, oppression, and lobbying. The first is just honest mistakes and errors. You just can't find a document, or you didn't realize it said that. And then again, ignorance of the law is no excuse. The income tax law now has 600 pages in the book. Thousands of things. Some provisions pages long. The IRS people don't understand it. There's no accountant that understands it. Accountants have a terrible time referring to this one and back and forth. So it leads to evasion. So it's immoral. If it leads me to cheat just a little, you know, it's too much trouble and I can get by with it. And so it reduces a morality level. Collusion. People work together to change their income tax affairs themselves. I won't go into that a lot, but a lot of it exists, especially among attorneys and accountants. My accountant said to me once when the income tax levied an $80,000 penalty on our company, he said, "Now, I'll go as far as I can without making the IRS angry at me. But there's a point which I can't defend you any further, because if the IRS is against me, all my other clients will suffer." How's that for pretty kettle. Intimidation, you can understand how the oppression. Lobbying, oh my. The attorneys used to try to defend their clients, wealthy clients, business and so forth. They try to defend them, and then they got smart. They just go into the congressman and say, look, if you pass this law, we'll do something for you. Next election, we'll help you, but we want you to get written into the tax code. Anybody that lives in Greenway Circle and flies a flag is exempt from paying income tax. And they have hundreds and thousands of little things like that that apply to a select group. So they have an attorneys organization now. They have attorneys in every state who are in this organization of lobbying Congress to change the income tax in favor of them. They tell businessmen, no, let's not fight it anymore, let's just get an exemption. Power of states and cities. Now the Tax Exempt Foundation, I say a little about that. These people, the Rockefellers and others who secretly promoted the income tax, openly they were against it. Oh, this is terrible, we don't like this. But secretly they worked among people to bring about the 16th Amendment. But in the income tax law, they provided for charitable tax-free foundations. If you made, and some of you know you have certain deductions for charity and so forth, but if they would establish the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, the Mott Foundation, all of those wealthy businessmen set up a charitable foundation. They're the officers of it. They donate huge amounts of money to it, and then they use it for charitable purposes. Their charity. They use it for promoting their program of taking over the United States. They might have a charitable organization for feeding seeds to the birds in the winter or something. And they might feed a bird or two. But these tax-free foundations are draining billions of dollars out of the taxes to these rich people who don't need it except to pervert their purposes. The road to socialism. At first, the churches began to oppose it. Our church opposed very much. And then they went to them and said, look, we're going to make donations to your church a tax deduction. You will get lots of donations that you wouldn't get anyway. Oh, then we're for it. So the churches are for it. Colleges and schools, the same thing. They were told that if the students could deduct their tuition and certain things like that from their taxes, that the colleges would benefit from the students coming, and that the government would provide them certain programs and certain monies to get them. All right. Families, well, if you're in the right family and know the right people, you can lessen the bite of the income tax. All right, it's the road to socialism. In the fundamental principles, I overlooked one, and that is that it is the right and obligation of every citizen to be alert, to be informed about social, educational, communistic, and other political influences that would tend to undermine our free society. And here's a warning from the First Presidency, a First Presidency message several years ago. We again remind Latter-day Saints of the dangers of communism. Then it said, Satan is making war against all the wisdom that has come to ages of experience. He is seeking to overturn and destroy the very foundation upon which society, government, and religion rest. He aims to have men adopt theories and practices which induced their forefathers to adopt, only to be discarded when they found them ruinous. He plans to destroy liberty, freedom, and there's a difference between liberty and freedom, as I explained before, economic, political, and religious, three legs on the stool, and to set up in the place thereof the greatest, most widespread, most complete tyranny that has ever oppressed men. He is working under such perfect disguise that many do not recognize either him or his methods. There is no crime he would not commit, no debauchery he would not set up, no plague he would not send, no heart he would not break, no soul he would not destroy. Now get this. He comes as a thief in the night. He is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Without their knowing it, the people are being urged down paths that lead only to destruction. Satan never had so firm a grip on a generation as he has now. Message of the First Presidency. Heber J. Grant, J. Reuben Clark, David O. McKay at the conference Saturday, October 3rd. And I take this from this book of President McKay's, that he urged be put in every Latter-day Saint home, and it didn't get into 1 in 1,000. Most people never heard of it. It is absolutely a shame. I think I told you that I bought and distributed hundreds of them. When it went out of print, I printed 100. Went as far as I could. But I have another quotation similar to that a little later. I was in a chiropractor's office a while back, and a woman sitting there came over and said, "You don't remember me, but my husband and I took your study course several years ago, and it changed our lives. We continued, we studied Cleon Skousen's book and other books, and we just adjusted our life. We paid off our debts, we got our year's supply, we sold our big home and moved to a home without a mortgage in Queen Creek, and we're homeschooling our children. You have changed our lives." Well, I say that to show that you never know what influence you'll be. Sometimes just a word, a thought, you may have a greater influence. The things you learn in here, you may never realize how much influence you may have with other people just by mentioning it to them. And then she said, "Our son has grown, and he would like to take your course, and we would like to take it over again." Because property and taxes are so closely related, I brought this to show you that the federal government several years ago divided our country into 10 regional, created metro regional government. Arizona and Nevada and California are in 9, and the judge in San Francisco is the one that has made all these terrible judgments on taking God out of school. Can't have the 10 Commandments. You can't mention God in political things. This, I won't go into it, but it's a thing that they are pursuing, setting up instructions to the people in these regional governments about what they want done. The Constitution provides the federal government may have such property as is necessary for a seat of government not exceeding 10 square miles, and such property as purchased with the consent of states in the state for arsenals, docks, army, and military affairs. That's all. The federal government was not expected. We have many national parks and forests, and the federal government, and this is about 15 years old, now owns all the black spots that you see in this.
All the West?
Most of the West they have taken over. Arizona has a very small percentage of the acreage in our state limits. Can you see what that does to our prosperity? If we had all these lands, we could sell them, people could build on them, they could run businesses, farms, or whatever. The rest of the country does not have so much because the fight on the Constitution had not gone that far until later years. In those early days, first place, Our elected officials knew what the Constitution said. They weren't trying to take land. And these little spots you see are land that they needed for some purpose. Here's a list of the land statistics state by state, which I won't go into, but it tells how many acres you have, what the government has. Recently, there's been a great deal of controversy on Yellowstone National Park and others because they're not operated properly. They say they're in danger the way they're going. I think I mentioned that there are more fires, disastrous fires, in government forests than in all the private forests there are, because the private forests weed them out, clean them out. They use cleansing fires under control and keep them, and they replant as they harvest them. They're accused of denuding our forests. They're cutting down all our trees. Stop all this lumbering. And they have stopped much of our lumbering. Much of our lumber business. It's been, those in the building industry know that it's hard to get just the plain common pine lumber and other things that you used to get. Business is so, they're always ahead of government. When they couldn't get lumber, then they learned how to make particle board. And much of everything you have today is particle board. They took the scraps, the chips and everything, and ground them up and mixed them with glue and come out with particle board. It's much heavier. A sheet of that will weigh 80 pounds compared to about 45 pounds of a regular piece of plywood. And so it makes work harder. And I'm going to discuss Social Security along with income tax and also with charity and poor. Social Security is supposed to be a charitable thing. Take care of the older folks. Oh, that was going to be a wonderful thing. All these elderly people don't have to worry. They'll have enough money to live the rest of their lives. There'll be a little tax to provide for it. But with the upcoming generations putting in, it'll just be a perpetual huge fund that when anybody turns 60, it was 55, 60, 65, why they can draw Social Security the rest of their life at an amount that would make a fairly good living. Well, with inflation, the value of the dollar keeps dropping, but people on fixed incomes, Social Security, that money becomes worth less and less each year. And so now the benevolent government's going to fix that. They give you a 2% adjustment. Anything the government does which is unconstitutional fails in its purpose and makes the problem worse than it was before they tried to solve it. That's a fundamental principle. Government cannot do anything unconstitutional that comes out right. And we can get into a lot of that there. In addition to taxes you're aware of, there are many taxes that individually we may not be aware of unless they affect us. But they have accounts receivable tax in business, a building permit tax, a cigarette tax, a corporate income tax, a personal income tax, a dog license tax, federal unemployment tax to provide Social Security money, a fishing license tax, food license, fuel permit, gasoline tax. When this was written, it's 42 cents a gallon. It's whatever now, $1 or so. Fuel permit tax, hunting license, inheritance tax. The inheritance tax was part of the Communist Manifesto. Do not let families pass their properties on to their children, because that destroys family. You know, son, if you work with us in this business, when you get on, you'll own the business. Can't do that anymore. Invoice check, IRS interest charges and penalties. I think millions of dollars interest on the mistakes you made on your income tax. Liquor license. Now, talk about cigarette tax and liquor license. You say, well, that's great, but I'm just listing it as a tax. luxury taxes, marriage license tax, have to have permission to get married, and it's good that marriages should be recorded, family history purposes, but you shouldn't have to pay a big tax to get a license to get married. Property tax, we'll talk about that more. I have more. Real estate, service charges, road usage, sales tax, recreation vehicle tax. If you own these recreation vehicles, why, you use more of the road than somebody else, so you pay an extra tax on that. School tax, state unemployment tax, telephone federal excise tax, telephone federal universal service tax, telephone federal and state telephone taxes on state and local surcharge taxes. If you look at your tax bill, you see they've added surcharge on there. In other words, a tax so much, but because it's cost in, they've added it. But they tax the surcharges now. Telephone minimum usage surcharge tax. I'm not familiar with that, but I don't use it that much. Telephone state and local tax, telephone usage charge tax. If you count the taxes, and they now allow you to deduct your state and local sales tax. That adds one more complicated thing to your tax return. Utility taxes, vehicle license. It costs quite a bit of money to register your vehicle. Why? Other than the office expense of doing it, why should they have a big tax? Vehicle sales tax, watercraft registration tax, well permit tax, workers' compensation tax. There may be more than listed there, I don't know. I want to talk a little bit about Social Security. Here again, Social Security devised as a charitable way of helping people, but it is based on the taxes that you're supposed to pay for it. It's supposed to be an insurance plan backed by the federal government. They tell you this is an insurance plan. Now, everybody, all these elderly people that can't afford insurance, now they have insurance of a minimum income every month. The deductions can be pooled in a trust fund. They allow you to put money into a trust fund so that you don't have to pay tax on it until you retire later. I don't know which end it bites worse. Employer's contribution match the worksheet tax. If the tax is up to, I don't know what percentage now, the employer puts a like amount of money. Does that come out of the employer's pocket? No, it comes out of your wages because the employer can't afford to pay all these taxes and stay in business. So anything the employer or the business ever adds, ever is taxed, is added to the price of goods. Now, some of the companies make a great deal about their great charitable work they do. $2,000 a year for every this and this and that. Do they pay it? You pay it at the ballpark or the checkout counter or wherever. There is no way that anything can be paid for except by the people. The government owns no money. They are running some 400 different businesses they have no right to run, but they cannot create money except this inflation false money. Indexing makes it inflation proof. I told you about 2% a year. Inflation goes a lot faster than that. They claimed that it would abolish all federal welfare, that as the Social Security tax went into operation after many years, everybody would be well taken care of, and it would abolish many welfare programs. The welfare programs have multiplied tremendously, and we get into that. It provides criminal charges for those who evade or make errors in income tax. But the real name is social insecurity. It's not an insurance, but a dole. You do not own the money that's in there. That is just a tax. Now, in order to make sure that you always have it, they take all that money and put it here in a nice fund. It builds up billions of dollars to assure that everybody will have money. Now, the government runs out of money, so what does it do? They borrow out of this fund and put a note in there. Here is this. We owe this fund $50 million this time, 50. The government now has more debts in the Social Security fund than there is Social Security. How secure is that? An income tax, not an insurance contribution. This is, you're paying your insurance, and I think I've explained that. The employer share is not a matching contribution, but is an excise tax on the employer, which eventually comes out of the employees or the customers' price. Indexing guarantees more inflation. There's no way that the income tax, the Social Security tax, can continue without costing more just because of inflation. No person has any claim on any amount. When the Social Security recipient gets a check at third of the month for so-and-so, the government can take that away anytime it wants to. They can change the law. You don't have a claim on it. Now, to my great shame and sorrow, since I retired from my business, had no other income, I'm on Social Security. I avoided it for the first 10 years that I could have collected it, and I intended never to take it in my life, but I got the position. I talked to one of the general authorities, and he said, "Oh, it's not wrong to take it. If Israel wants a king, you have to live by the king." So I don't feel guilty in that sense, but I don't feel happy about doing it. And I don't feel the government is doing me a great favor when they give me a dole. It is a criminal, unconstitutional fraud. What is the solution? Well, if they cut off Social Security immediately, it would leave hundreds of thousands, millions of people in terrible shape. As Taft Benson said, it has to be eased out. The first step would be to guarantee to continue to pay it to all those who are now on it. Now, how do you do that? Sale of public lands. They could. This is the way that Joseph Smith and Abraham Lincoln wanted to solve the slavery problems. Sale of public lands, repatriate them in Africa, set them up with homes and business and money. But the Reconstructionists didn't want that. They wanted to use slavery as a political tool. The present worker would have a refund of what they have paid in, would allow them to create private investment funds. The new workers would not be forced to pay for older folks' doles. The young people today will never benefit from Social Security. There will not be any money by the time they get there. Social Security will be broken. Now I want to talk about a special tax, which you may have never heard of, but it's part of the income tax. People are complaining, the rich get by without paying any taxes. The poor pay all the taxes. Well, that isn't true. The rich pay 64% of the taxes, and the poor pay 9%, and the middle class pays something like 30%, and so forth. But the rich pay their taxes. Unless they're in a foundation or some sort of thing like that, the rich are taxed. Now, they said, well, what we're going to do is create a alternative minimum tax. That is, we give them two ways. They can either deduct all these things and claim that, or they can do away with deductions and use this alternative minimum. So now they have to figure the taxes both ways, and it's complicated to see which one is more favorable to, is less destructive to them, I should say. And it's caused a great deal of trouble. The alternative minimum tax is a separate tax requiring taxpayers to calculate their taxable income without many popular deductions to state and local taxes. to determine if they save more than with the regular taxes. Won't discuss that further, but except to say that the costs for your certified public accountant, and years ago I gave up trying to do my own taxes. I just don't know enough about it. Well, 4 years ago, my tax bill was $140. Last year it was $641 because they have to go to school, they have to study, they have to employ people. Now, that 641 include the sale and purchase of property, so it wasn't entirely that. But my tax bite has been rising, and if you have a CPA, you probably see that yours has been too. But these different taxes and regulations they make cause the certified public accountants to, it costs them more to do your taxes. At last, a happy IRS story. You like this, you love it. This is an actual case. The government claimed my husband and I owed tax money. The problem was we had already paid the item in question, and second, the agency had levied interest and penalties. I told you about that $80,000 they assessed against our company. Well, went through and we went to court in Washington, D.C., and we won the case. Come out on the Wall Street Journal headlines, Stradling's win trademark case, because there were thousands of people that had made the same investments that we had made. You say, well, where did you get $80,000 making? We didn't have that much money, but by the time they added all the interest and penalties, it ran up to $80,000. But with an attorney who knew what he was doing, he brought that case through to the court in Washington, D.C., and I just love that article I have out of the Wall Street Journal. Anyway, now here are these people in this trouble. Numerous phone calls to the IRS went as you might expect. We said we didn't owe the money. The agency, through a different agency every time we called, said we did. To make a long story short, we finally gave up and sent the $700 they demanded. Now comes a taxpayer's friend. There's an organization called Tax Advocate Service. This is an organization set up now in every state, and anybody that has a problem of that sort can go to them, and they have many means of taking care of it for them. So I mentioned that they have about 100,000 employees and computer banks all over the place. Some computer systems don't talk to one another. Others only update once a week. So although people believe they have resolved something with one part of the organization, they get a notice from another part, another agency. This leads to frustration for taxpayers. Today this group has 75 offices around the country, at least one in each state. Altogether, Tax Advocacy Service has about 1,900 employees. What really impacts older Americans is that IRS is moving away from face-to-face service. You know, you can't talk to anybody anymore. You get internet or dial this and press 1 if you're that, or press 2 if you're not, so forth. So it's very difficult to talk to anybody. Most of the taxpayer problems are honest mistakes. Very few of them, I think it says here, less than 3% of the tax cases are for fraud. They're nearly all for mistakes people made. So you can see what that, anyway, happy day. I think if for a little ease here, I'll go to Abraham Lincoln's address here. Remember, Abraham Lincoln made the famous address, 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we're engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place of those who here gave their lives that a nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this, but in a larger sense we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our power to add or detract. The world will not note nor long remember what we say here, but can never forget what they did here. Now, that's just the opposite. Most people hardly know what Gettysburg is or what went on, but most people have heard of Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work they have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to the cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that the dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, that government of the people, for the people, all the people, by the people, and for the people, shall not perish from the earth. That last phrase is famous. Now, again, I hope this is not insulting or wrong, that, but I think it's a lighter thing, and that might enjoy it. Taxes. 116 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this nation a new tax, conceived in desperation and dedicated to the proposition that all men are fair game. Now we're engaged in a great mass of calculations, testing whether that taxpayer or any taxpayer, so confused and so impoverished, can long endure. We are met on Form 1040. We have come to dedicate a large portion of our income to its final resting place, with those men who here spent their lives that they may spend our money. It is altogether anguish and torture that we should do this, but in the legal sense, we cannot evade, we cannot cheat, we cannot underestimate this tax. The collectors, sly and clever, who have computed here have gone far beyond our poor power to add or subtract. Our creditors will little note nor long remember what we pay here, but the Bureau of Internal Revenue can never forget what we report here. It is rather for us to be dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these vanished dollars we take increased devotion to the few remainder, that we hereby highly resolve that the next year will not find us in a higher income tax bracket. Mrs. Keller was asking me about our freedoms, what we've lost, and how much of the Constitution. And I told her that I would explain what I did in one of the early lessons, that we are not a free people. We've lost our freedom. Freedom is not plural. Freedom is the right to make choice. Freedom is our word for the Lord's word agency. And that is the whole basis on which we can serve. Freedom, it's one thing. Now, liberties are the many things that you can use when you have freedom. We no longer have liberties. And because governments do not like to stir the people up to rebellion, or as they need to keep them pacified. If it goes too far, well, they back off a little bit. But so we lost our freedom in 1916, the day the income tax amendment was ratified. Because at that moment, we lost the control of 100% of everything we have. And we subjected ourselves to every unconscious that you can think of. So that's my answer about it. Here's recent newspaper article. Savings rate hits a 73-year low. Savings of people. People used to have savings of nest egg or a rainy day fund or something. Most of them, many of them no longer have savings accounts. Many of them have credit debt, credit card debt. But what a terrible thing that is for the economy. When people have savings, put them in banks. Banks lend them business for investments and operations. So it not only is detrimental to individuals, but is detrimental to the whole economy. Property tax. The city charter prohibits a property tax. Most cities of any size have a property tax. And in the Founding Fathers' description, outside of the income tax, which is not really a tax, I'll explain, it is the worst form of taxation. Why? Because it taxes your property again and again and again and again, and as values rise, it increases it. It is a terrible thing. Alexander Hamilton said, no person or group of persons could ever fairly estimate the value of thousands of pieces of property of all different descriptions, sizes, and kinds. Absolutely impossible. And so we have assessors that go around and will say $300,000, say $250,000. Oh, this neighborhood $150,000. Tax assessor, I thought that was a little high. Now, could you make that a little lower? There's a lot of collusion goes on. I'm not accusing any particular person, but I know that manipulation of property tax. See, you have a right to appeal. Now, the county assessor tells you property is valued so usually about 30% of what the market value is, and then you get the property tax based on the full value of your property. But you have the right to appeal. Well, most of us can't go through the appeal process, but people who are well off or have good attorneys or accountants do, and many of them, they go before the county supervisor board and say, look, okay, we're going to. So all taxes are supposed to be equal. And so there's inequality in taxation by the property tax. Well, the city of Mesa, all these years without a property tax. Only big city. Oh, we should have property taxes. All the other cities have a property tax. Well, they ought to look to Mesa as a guiding light. Mesa has tried to get a property tax several times, but they haven't tried very hard. They've had sufficient income as long as they did what they ought to and no more. But in the last 20 years, our city council has spent wildly, hundreds of millions of dollars. Let's see if I can find anything out here. Mesa Arts Center. Oh, we're going to build this great arts center. It'll attract visitors, it'll make us a lot of money, and it'll make Mesa a great example to the country. Wonderful thing. It'll only cost $30 million if we can afford it. $30 million. At the time this is written, the cost is up to $94 million. And now it has gone over $100 million for that art center. And a letter to the editor from one said, oh, I love the art center. I take my children, we can see all these movies. It is so wonderful. Well, she does it with your money. Take money from one person to benefit another. That's not in line with our constitutional principles. When they finally determined to have a property tax, now I served on the city council for 10 years. I've been on their committees for 25 years. I know how they operate. I know how they do taxes. I know what they do when they want something. Now, there is a law which says that no government agency can promote their own taxes. They can only make a statement of what those taxes are. The school boards used to send home letters with the children, vote for school bonds, vote for school. I'm going to say, you can't do that. All you can do is say, we propose school bonds in the amount of such and such for such purposes. So the schools are doing them. Well, the city has a lovely way of getting around that. They set a series of meetings in every district, and they appointed a committee, an advisory committee, to go into every city. And the council, the mayor, the council, would go into the district and hold this meeting and say, we're here just to advise you of property tax. Now, the reason we need a property tax is we're $100 million, well, $30 million deficit. We've got this deficit. We've got all these expenditures. We've got a deficit. The charter prevents us from going in debt. We've got to raise $30,000 by the 1st of July because we have a deficit. Well, our son Harold, who is operating that machine back there, by the way, we got into this property tax thing right away, and it was one of the most disheartening things. I've been in many city fights. I don't like to fight, but propositions. But when this came up, I jumped on it immediately. I called in 5 of the most influential men that I've worked in. We sat in this room for 2 hours trying to think of some way to raise a little money to fight this property tax. Not a one of us could. We got up and decided, well, we just can't stop it. I went to bed that night as near discouraged as I ever been. Well, I woke up in the morning feeling terrible, just awful. I'd give up, no use. I've never felt that way in my life. I've always had that, wind point. But I was just, and the doorbell rang, and a woman that's a relative of mine, and I'm not going to embarrass her by telling your name, but she came in and said, I had a thought that I ought to come see you. You have any trouble? I said, oh, I'm just discouraged. What's your trouble? Well, this crazy property tax. We can't raise any money. Well, I'll give you $5,000. I just sold some property. Well, it turned out on a limit that $4,000 money would take. But with that $4,000, we went out and made these little signs and put them all over Mesa. We had some big 4x8s and so forth. Question 2 on the ballot was, shall we have a property tax? And we aroused many organizations. We contacted many local, civic, and other organizations and gave them information, the printed information on the property tax. And they just came up alive. It was wonderful. How much influence can one person be? That one woman made it possible for us to campaign against it. And in the election, we beat it. And the city was absolutely shocked. The city spent $150,000 promoting that. And I think that's absolutely illegal, but they did. I in the city, other people, the Chamber of Commerce, and certain business and labor organizations, all these people who benefit so much. See, when the property tax is passed, there's a big, never-ending river of funds coming just like that. Because it doesn't fluctuate with sales or anything else. Your home is your home, and it keeps flowing in there. And so they spent $150,000 promoting it, and we spent $5,300. We won because the people of Mesa began to see it. Now, I went out. I said, they don't have a deficit. They're not telling the truth. They're misrepresenting. I said, the city charter prevents them from having a deficit. They must have a budget. The deficit they have is on next year's expenditures. This year's expenditure fully funded. Every dollar is there. Now, their next year's budget is based on whatever they think they want, could get, and so forth. And then by the 1st of July, they have to get together and settle it. But instead of saying, well, what can we cut down of these hundreds of millions of dollars of spending. They say, how can we get a property tax to pay for it? So they carried on that great educational campaign. Well, our son Harold, who's operating that machine back there, jumped into it, and he put this in the pamphlet that comes out before elections in opposition, in favor and opposition, and cost $250 to put in there. But by a 4-3 vote, the council set this election seeking a property tax. It was actually a 5-2 vote. Two council members opposed it. To erase a $25 million deficit, scare tactics threatened drastic cuts in service, inadequate police, fire protection, pothole streets, dark libraries, empty swim pools, unused playgrounds, irreplaceable employees fleeing to better jobs. The truth, there is no deficit, and then as I explained, the charter requires a balanced budget, and it is balanced. Overspending plus proposed department budgets exceed anticipated income by $25 million. A 3% reduction on $875 million would wipe it out with a stroke of a pen. They don't need a property tax. With very slight effect on operations. This budget is $65 million more than last year's budget, which is a 300% increase since 1990. In 10 years, it has increased 300%. They cry for a property tax for a stable income. Stable indeed. A permanent lien on your property with ever-rising tax. See, a property tax, if you vote for a property tax, what you vote is a lien on your property. If the city does not pay an automatic property tax, they call it a secondary property tax, that property tax goes into effect automatically by law because you have signed an agreement with your vote that you would pay for it if the city doesn't. Do you understand that? All right. Most people don't. A river of dollars for big spenders. No limit to salaries and grandiose projects. The city of Mesa has 40 employees who receive more than $100,000 and 138 more who receive more than 86, and 13 management employees receive over 120. Now that has gone up. The city manager, at the date this was written, when they're fighting property tax, had a salary of $166,000, but they changed city manager, then retired, and they brought in a new manager at $187,000 with a $20,000 bonus for leaving San Antonio, and a $20,000 moving fee, and a $500 a month automobile allowance. And recently, just 2 or 3 weeks ago, they gave him a 6% increase in salary, plus time off for personal things. We have 140 employees who make more than the governor of Arizona. And I won't read them, but all of these employees here, more than $100,000. Now, that's not the worst of it. Once the river is flowing, then they can jack up the salary just like this. And they can do this way. I work for the city. I have a desk and I have a certain job to do, and I do it. Well, I resigned. They hired a woman to take my place. She had to have an assistant and an office boy, some filing cabinets and everything. Now, because she has an office boy and assistant, her salary goes up. She makes much more than I did. But because all the salaries above her are based on the same thing, everybody else's salary goes up. Now, on top of that, they have retirement the rest of their lives, plus pensions and various other things. Now, when you get 1,800 employees running your city, you can see that you're just building up. You need more than a property tax to cover that. This property tax election was a special election. It cost the city $180,000 to put on that election. Wasted money. Never should have been there. The drain on personal time and resource. Think how many hundreds of us spent so many hours out working on this. Just a waste of time. It wasn't wasted because we won. Even if increased income were justified, property tax is the worst means. A special assessment or sale of unused assets would achieve it without a property tax. Well, I have a quick solution to that. Don't do anything unconstitutional and you won't need all that tax. And that goes back to the fundamental principle. Government is made to protect, not to provide. Government is not to provide. Government has no right to feed the poor, take care of children, make parks and playgrounds, libraries, anything. They don't have that right. Now they take it, but it's violating constitution. Oh, what do we do without libraries? What do we do without swimming pools? What without work? Well, Mesa had 2 swimming pools before the city ever built one. But they went out of business because the city was free and they had to charge. The best libraries in this country are private libraries. They're run very economically and carefully. Our library has hundreds of employees and they take on everything on earth that they can think of. They have to have newspapers from all the cities for the winter visitors. Why should Mesa pay for winter visitors' newspapers? I could have at least 20 cities that they take the winter newspapers, and I could name endless things like that. If Mesa would do away with the providing Meals on Wheels, taxes for the elderly, you say, well, they have to do that. Who will take care of the poor if they don't? Well, who takes most care of the poor? By the way, one of the handouts I gave you is 2 newspaper articles that were so well written that I couldn't do any better. And I'll read them. One is Mesa Councilman Tom Rawls. He was former city Maricopa County on the county board, but he lists here exactly what the city is doing. Too many extras that he cannot approve. When I was on the council for 10 years, why, it was Stradling voted no. City did so-and-so, 6-1. Stradling voted no. Went on and on. People say, why did Stradling vote no? Well, then I would have voted no. So the paper quit saying Stradling voted no. They just say city council passed 6-1. And after a couple of years, David Udall sat on council and went, he said, there have been a lot of 6-1 votes on this council. I'm here to tell you there are going to be a lot of 5-2 votes from now on. Pretty soon it was 5-3. And by the time my 10-year term limits was up, I was beginning to win 1 or 2. So reasonable people, when they know the truth, can be reasoned, and who knows, you may influence people more than I do. The other cautionary tax tale from New Jersey. Here's a member of the New Jersey City Council who now lives in Scottsdale. And when he heard about this property tax, he wrote this article explaining exactly what the property tax did to people in New Jersey. Raised the property tax where it's almost impossible to sell their property anymore. He said the tax on his home is $8,000 a year now, and he doesn't have a rich home. And a lot of them just trying to sell their property and get out. And that's the effect of a property tax if they don't stop. Now, many of the cities hold it down very well, but it still provides for many of these things that they should not be doing, and for ever increasing salaries for those that are there. A last word or two on bonds. So now the governor, who has proposed $400 million on top of the other money that state owes for next year, wants to extend the bonds to 30 years. So you've got $400 million worth of bonds. Just extend them. Well, Mesa Schools, Mesa City sells hundreds of millions of dollars worth of bonds. The interest on those bonds goes to Eastern bankers. Millions and millions of dollars flow out of Mesa. Those Eastern bankers are pretty shrewd about pulling, but the bond thing allows them to charge up to 10% interest for a period of 25 years. Now, you like to vote for bonds like that? People say, well, how can we finance it? Well, number one, don't do what you shouldn't do. And when we get to the lesson on education, I think I can give you some surprising things to many people. But the bonds are a way of passing debt to our children and grandchildren. And we're loading them up. Well, I see the time is up, and I didn't get to this one. And in my other course, 24 lessons, it took an entire lesson. So when you come back, I will fill in that and then move on to the next lesson, which is on the Judiciary Department, the Supreme Court. Now, as I said at the beginning, these remaining lessons are the meat and potatoes of this course. They're the purpose of everything we taught in principles and bad government and so forth. So I do hope that you can struggle through. You don't spend more time on it than I do. But I love you for your faithfulness and the interest you show and your kindness. Class dismissed.